The book of Judges is a stark and unsettling read. Within its pages lie some of the most grotesque and disturbing events in the entire Bible. There's no sugarcoating, no softening of the blow. This isn't accidental. Judges was written to make us uncomfortable, to jolt us awake from complacency. It's a raw, unflinching look at the consequences of straying from faith. The book opens immediately after what should have been Israel's most triumphant moment, the conquest of the Promised Land. They possessed everything they could have dreamed of, a divinely ordained inheritance. Yet, a single generation was all it took to squander it all. Israel didn't fall to a mighty, invading army. Instead, it rotted from the inside out. They forgot who they were, they forgot who their God was, and they turned the Promised Land into a mirror image of Sodom and Gomorrah. Brace yourself. The book of Judges is a downward spiral into the abyss. Each judge seems worse than the last, each fall more devastating. Sin, corruption, and oppression become a relentless cycle until the nation is devouring itself. And perhaps the most unnerving aspect of all isn't just the human wickedness. It's the silence. The terrifying silence of a God whose patience has finally reached its limit. Pay close attention because this book serves as a warning. It's a lesson about the fate that awaits any society that turns its back on God and willingly embraces darkness. It's a timeless cautionary tale that echoes through history. The Israelites were once euphoric. Led by Joshua, they had entered the Promised Land and conquered Canaan. They were eyewitnesses to awe-inspiring miracles. The Jordan River parted before them. The walls of Jericho crumbled at their approach. They possessed the law of Moses to guide them, and the tabernacle, the very presence of God, shone brightly at their center. It seemed like this was destined to be the dawn of a golden age for Israel, a time of unprecedented prosperity, peace, and divine favor. But then the book of Judges begins, and the scene has drastically shifted. Only a single generation had passed, yet the people had forgotten everything. They no longer knew God. They worshipped Baal and intermarried with their enemies, blurring the lines between the sacred and the profane. And if you're wondering who was in charge, the answer is bleak. No one. This isn't a story of heroes. There's no happy ending, and it won't leave you with a pleasant feeling. This is the chronicle of how a nation that had it all decided to throw it all away. The phrase that sums up the era is chilling. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Moral relativism reigned supreme, and the consequences were catastrophic. We find ourselves in 1200 BC. Israel is a mess. The 12 tribes can barely tolerate each other, existing as a fragile federation that only unites when faced with an imminent threat of annihilation. It was the Iron Age, and the world surrounding Israel was equally chaotic. Great empires like the Hittites and the Egyptians were crumbling. The so-called Sea Peoples were invading the coasts, disrupting trade routes and destabilizing the established order. There was a global power vacuum, and amidst this chaos, Israel was struggling to survive with a humiliating technological disadvantage. Consider this revealing detail, one of the most perplexing verses in the book. The Lord was with Judah. He drove out the inhabitants of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain, because they had chariots of iron. The enemy possessed what amounted to war tanks, 900 chariots of iron. Israel, on the other hand, fought with farm tools. There was neither shield nor spear found among 40,000 in Israel. And with this, we enter the dark heart of the book, the downward spiral. Many read Judges and see a repeating circle, but that's a misinterpretation. It's not a circle. It's a spiral that sinks further and further with each rotation, pulling Israel into an ever-worsening state of depravity. First, the people would sin. Then, God would deliver them into the hands of an oppressor. Anguished, they would cry out for help. In His mercy, God would raise up a judge, and the land would experience peace. But then the judge would die, and the cycle would begin anew. The terrible truth is that each turn of the spiral was worse than the last. Whenever the judge died, they turned back and behaved more corruptly than their fathers. Even God, who initially responded immediately to the cries of His people, eventually says to them with harshness, Did I not save you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you? Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in the time of your distress. Forgiveness, without genuine transformation, was only postponing the inevitable collapse. Like a dog that returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. The very title of the book, Judges, is the ultimate irony. We expect to find wisdom and justice, but what we discover is a catalog of anti-heroes. These leaders aren't the solution to Israel's problems. They're merely a symptom of the underlying disease. The root of the problem is that the people desired leaders who resembled themselves. When God delivered them the land, His command had been clear. They were not to intermingle with the Canaanites, lest they become infected with their moral and spiritual corruption. The conquest of the land failed, and not because Canaan defeated Israel on the battlefield. It failed because Israel became Canaan. The enemy was no longer outside. The enemy was within. The decline happened within a single generation. The contrast was stark. On one side, Israel, a people forged in the desert, shepherds, nomads, dwellers in tents. On the other, the Canaanites, landowners with their technology, their cities, and their agricultural expertise. And tribe by tribe, the Israelites began to view the Canaanites not as a threat to be expelled, but as a resource to be exploited. The thinking was pragmatic. Why destroy vineyards, fields, and infrastructure that were already functional? The solution seemed logical. Instead of driving them out, they subjected them to forced labor. This is where the story takes a terrible turn. The Hebrew word for forced labor is mas, exactly the same term that the Bible uses to describe the slavery that Israel suffered in Egypt. In a few generations, the liberated people became the oppressors. That decision, which seemed purely economic, unleashed an unstoppable chain reaction. First came geographical coexistence, living alongside them. Then economic cooperation, working with them. The next step was inevitable, mixed marriages that transformed the enemy into family. And finally, spiritual collapse, religious syncretism. Syncretism is the dangerous blending of beliefs, where people begin to worship the Canaanite gods alongside the God of Israel. The result was as rapid as it was catastrophic. The book of Judges sums it up in one devastating verse. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that He had done for Israel. This tragedy occurred in a single generation. That's all it took for the memory of the miracles of the Exodus and the conquest to simply fade away. In practice, the Israelites created a kind of diversified spiritual portfolio. They worshipped Yahweh for battles and national identity, but they turned to Baal, the Canaanite god of rain, to ensure good harvests, and to Ashtaroth for fertility. Then comes Judge Othniel. In the midst of this chaos, God raises up the first judge, Othniel. His story, though brief, establishes the pattern that we'll see repeated again and again. Israel sins. God delivers them to an oppressor. The people cry out for help. God raises up a deliverer, a judge. The judge rescues them, and there is peace. But the judge dies, and the cycle begins anew. Othniel is the ideal case, the model to follow. He was the nephew of the great hero Caleb. He has no recorded moral failings, and his victory is clean and straightforward. He liberates the people and dies in peace. But this is the last truly happy story we are going to read. From here on out, everything gets progressively worse. After Othniel's death, Israel falls again, this time under the yoke of Eglon, king of Moab. The text says that the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud. AD breaks all the molds. Ehud, something that seems insignificant, but that is the key to the entire story. Ehud was left-handed, and here the irony is profound. Ehud belonged to the tribe of Benjamin, a name that literally means son of the right hand. So, the hero from the tribe of the right hand is a man who uses his left. In the ancient world, being left-handed was often considered a defect, a weakness. But God is about to turn what the world sees as a disadvantage into a lethal weapon. Ehud's plan isn't an open battle, it's an assassination. He crafts a double-edged dagger about 18 inches long, a weapon custom-made for a single mission, and he hides it under his clothes on his right thigh. The target was Eglon, a king whom the Bible describes as very fat. When Ehud leads the delivery of the tribute, the guards search him. But where do they look for the weapon? On the left thigh, where a right-handed person would carry it. Ehud's weakness becomes his strength, allowing him to bypass security. After delivering the tribute, Ehud asks for a private audience with the king, whispering that he has a secret message from God for him. Intrigued, King Eglon dismisses his servants. In the privacy of his summer room, Ehud approaches and declares, "I have a message from God for you." When the king rises from his throne, perhaps out of respect or superstition, he exposes his belly. In that instant, Ehud draws his dagger and plunges it into him with all his might. The message from God was a blade of steel. The Bible describes the scene with brutal realism and without censorship. And the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the dagger out of his belly, and the excrement came out. The great oppressor of Israel dies in the most humiliating way possible, losing control of his bowels in his final moments. With incredible coolness, Ehud locks the doors and escapes. When the king's servants return, they find everything locked and assume that their master is covering his feet, a polite euphemism for being in the bathroom. That assumption, born of embarrassment, gave Ehud time to flee, cross the Jordan, gather the army of Israel, and annihilate 10,000 Moabite soldiers. Let's pause for a moment. This is one of the most perplexing stories in the Bible. God doesn't speak directly. There are no obvious miracles. The deliverer is an assassin who succeeds through deceit and a cold-blooded murder. The text states that God raised up Ehud, but then it simply narrates the events without offering a moral judgment. It doesn't say, "And this pleased God," but it also doesn't say, "And this was a sin." It simply tells you what happened, with all its uncomfortable and violent details, and then falls silent. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. The narrator leaves you alone with the question, was what he did right? And it doesn't give you an easy answer. In times of absolute moral crisis, God sometimes uses instruments that don't fit into the idealized version of our Sunday school lessons. Othniel was the model judge. Ehud was a hitman. If you think the story of Ehud was morally complicated, prepare yourself. The judges who come after are much worse. The judge Deborah. In the ancient Near East, the rules were clear. War was a man's business, a clash of swords on the battlefield. Women, although sometimes voices of God like prophetesses, did not rule or administer justice. For 20 long years, Israel lived under the oppression of Jabin, the king of Canaan. His military power was terrifying, and it was in the hands of a general named Sisera, who commanded 900 chariots of iron. These were the tanks of antiquity, a war technology that seemed invincible against the light infantry of Israel. But in the mountainous region of Ephraim, something was breaking all the rules. Under a palm tree so well known that it already had its own name sat a woman. Her name was Deborah. She wasn't just a prophetess. She was the judge of Israel. The scriptures say, "Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment." Unlike the other judges that history would remember, Deborah didn't emerge as a warrior in the midst of the crisis. Her authority was already firmly established. In her was combined the prophetic role, the judicial role, and military leadership, a unique fusion of power in the history of Israel. She wasn't the wife of a king, nor a widow ruling in place of her son. She was the final authority. Her husband, Lapidoth, is mentioned only once and then disappears from the story. Her power didn't depend on any man. It emanated directly from God. One day she summoned a man named Barak, and her message wasn't a suggestion, but a divine order. "Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." But here something unusual occurs. For the first and only time in the entire book of Judges, a military leader imposes conditions on God. Barak's response was, "If you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go." Deborah's sentence was immediate and prophetic. "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." At that moment, everyone surely thought that Deborah was referring to herself. No one could have imagined the twist that history was about to take. 10,000 Israelites gathered on Mount Tabor. Down in the valley, General Sisera deployed his invincible army, his chariots of iron ready to crush the rebellion. But then God intervened. The heavens opened. A torrential storm overflowed the Kishon River, turning the battlefield into a quagmire. The Song of Deborah narrates it like this: "The torrent Kishon swept them away, the ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. March on, my soul, with might." Sisera's greatest strength became his death trap. The heavy chariots of iron sank into the mud, completely useless. Panic seized the Canaanite army, and in the midst of the chaos, the great general Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. Alone, as a desperate fugitive, he sought refuge in the territory of the Kenite, a nomadic clan that in theory maintained peace with his king. Exhausted, he arrived at the tent of a woman named Jael. She went out to meet him, a surprising initiative for a woman of her time. "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Do not be afraid," she said. Sisera, desperate, asked her for water, but Jael did much more. She offered him milk, a gesture of utmost hospitality in the desert culture, and covered him with a blanket, as if he were a child. The most feared general of Canaan, now defenseless, felt safe and fell into a deep sleep. And then, in the silence of the tent, Jael took the tools of her daily life, a tent peg and a hammer. She didn't use the sword of a warrior, but the weapons of a nomadic woman. And this is a crucial detail. In that culture, women were in charge of setting up and taking down the tents. Jael knew those tools perfectly. With a strength and precision born of custom, she placed the stake on the temple of the sleeping man and drove it with the hammer until it pierced his skull and fixed it to the ground. The poem describes it with unforgettable crudeness. At her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. The man who commanded 900 chariots of iron died in a fetal position, nailed to the ground with a domestic utensil by the very woman who had just tucked him in. Let's analyze her actions. She lied to a fugitive, broke a peace treaty, violated the sacred law of hospitality, and murdered a man in his sleep. But the biblical text doesn't condemn her. On the contrary, it celebrates her in a poem so ancient that its language is almost foreign to the rest of the Bible, the Song of Deborah. This song declares, "Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed." The Bible doesn't say it was a necessary evil or that God forgave her. It simply blesses her. It's the same formula of blessing that the angel Gabriel would use centuries later to greet Mary, the mother of Jesus. Jael wasn't an Israelite. She didn't receive a direct order from God, and yet the scripture elevates her to the category of heroine. But the poem doesn't end with the victory. The scene abruptly changes and takes us to Sisera's palace. His mother looks anxiously out the window, waiting for her son's triumphal return. Her ladies in waiting try to console her, imagining the reason for the delay. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A woman or two for every man. Here the Hebrew text is brutally crude. The word that is translated as woman is rekem, which literally means womb. The contrast is devastating. While Sisera's mother and her ladies fantasize about the mass rapes that her son would be committing as war booty, that same son lies dead, tucked in and nailed to the ground by the hand of a woman. Two opposing visions of women and motherhood collide in this ending. In the same song that celebrates the victory, Deborah gives herself a title that no male judge ever used. The villages ceased in Israel. They ceased until I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. On one hand, the mother who waits for the spoils of violence. On the other, the mother who rises up to administer justice and protect her people. After this victory, orchestrated by the wisdom of one woman and executed by the courage of another, Israel had 40 years of peace, the longest period in the entire book of Judges. But the situation worsened. The story of Gideon doesn't begin on a battlefield, but in a hole. In the geography of Israel, a winepress is a pit dug in the rock below ground level, designed for treading grapes. Gideon was hidden there, threshing the little wheat that he could save from his enemies. In the midst of this despair, an angel speaks to him with an irony that seems almost cruel. "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." He says it to a man who is working underground precisely to avoid being seen. Gideon's response isn't that of an unbeliever, but that of a believer with broken faith. He doesn't ask if God exists. He asks where he is and where are all his wonders that our fathers have told us about. The first mission that God entrusts to him is a direct attack on the altar that is in the courtyard of his own house. There, his father Joash had erected an altar to Baal, the false god that his family worshipped. Gideon obeys, but he does it at night, because he feared his father's family and the men of the city. God uses imperfect heroes. At dawn, the people demand his death for having torn down an idol. It's a terrible portrait of a sick society. The neighbors are willing to kill a man to defend a statue. His father, Joash, saves him with an implacable logic. If he is a god, let him contend for himself. Before facing the Midianite army that was oppressing Israel, Gideon summons all available men. 32,000 soldiers gather. But God orders a drastic reduction. First, he dismisses the fearful. 22,000 men admit their fear and go home. Of the 10,000 that remain, only 300 are chosen by means of a strange criterion, the way they drink water from a stream. The text doesn't stop to explain the method, because the method didn't matter. God's intention was to make something very clear, that the victory could never be attributed to human power, but only to him, lest Israel boast over me, saying, "My own hand has saved me." The battle occurs at night, without a single sword, only with clay jars, torches, and trumpets. The roar and the sudden light, breaking the darkness, unleashed absolute panic in the enemy camp. The confused Midianites kill each other. The victory was total, and its authorship unmistakably divine. At this moment, Gideon is the leader that Israel needed. After this impossible victory, the euphoric people offer him what seems like the logical reward, the crown. Gideon is pure theology, the pinnacle of his story. He represents a divinely appointed leader, but his subsequent actions reveal a flaw in his understanding of God's will. "I will not rule over you," he declares, "nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." These are perfect words, a humble leader recognizing his place under God's authority. Here, the story could end with Gideon as the selfless servant, forever remembered for his piety. But the Bible, in its unflinching honesty, rarely offers such neat and tidy resolutions. It delves into the complexities of human nature, even in those chosen by God. Immediately after his most spiritual pronouncement, Gideon reveals the crack in his heart, the hidden ambition that taints his victory. He rejects the title of king, yet immediately proceeds to act as though he were. He requests each man's gold earrings from the plunder, amassing nearly 20 kilograms of gold, a veritable royal fortune. With this newfound wealth, he takes many wives, fathering 70 sons, a harem worthy of a monarch. Then he crafts an ephod from the gold. A legitimate ephod was a sacred garment worn by the high priest to consult God. But Gideon's was a corrupt and dangerous imitation. First, he was not a priest. Second, he placed it in Ophrah, his city, creating an alternative worship center not authorized by God. This act essentially established a rival religious hub, undermining the central sanctuary and challenging the established order. And third, the 20 kilograms of gold transformed the garment into an idol, a monument to his own victory, a symbol of his aggrandizement rather than God's glory. The text is devastating in its indictment. And all Israel whored after it there, and that became a snare to Gideon and to his family. The people abandoned God to worship this object, a testament to the allure of tangible symbols and the ease with which faith can be corrupted. The destroyer of idols became the architect of one, a tragic reversal of his initial calling. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. But the final blow, the ultimate revelation of his hidden ambition, came with the name of a son. The child he fathered with his concubine in Shechem, Gideon named Abimelech. In Hebrew, Abimelech literally means, "My father is king." This name, a subtle yet profound declaration, exposed the desire he publicly denied. Thus, the tragic circle of his life is complete. Gideon began his journey in a hidden pit, destroying the idol that poisoned his family by night, and ended his life at the apex of power, displaying an idol that poisoned the entire nation in broad daylight. Gideon died at a good old age after 40 years of peace. Judgment did not fall upon him in his lifetime, but upon his legacy. As soon as he died, Israel returned to worshipping the Baals, and his own son Abimelech massacred 69 of his brothers to seize the throne that Gideon had publicly rejected but privately coveted. The ultimate consequence of his idolatry was not military defeat at the hands of an enemy, but a bloody civil war within his own house, a grim testament to the destructive power of unchecked ambition. And so enters Abimelech, the supposed judge. Unlike the judges who preceded him, Abimelech did not wait for God's call. He seized power himself. His campaign began in Shechem, his mother's city. There, he persuaded his relatives with a simple and powerful argument. Why be governed by the 70 sons of Gideon when one of their own could do it? The result was a chilling massacre. Abimelech hunted down his 70 brothers and executed them all upon a single stone. Only one managed to escape, Jotham, the youngest, who had hidden himself. Upon the foundation of this blood, the men of Shechem crowned him king. However, the biblical text is pointedly careful. It never calls him a judge. Abimelech was, in reality, the first de facto king of Israel, a king without any divine legitimacy. But the voice of justice could not be silenced. While Shechem celebrated the murderer, Jotham appeared on the summit of Mount Gerizim. Ironically, this was the mountain designated for proclaiming blessings, and from there he launched a curse veiled in a fable. He recounted how the trees sought a king. The olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine, productive and valuable trees, rejected the offer, for their purpose was to bear fruit. As Jotham said, useful leaders serve, they do not dominate. The only one who accepted was the bramble bush, a useless, thorny, dry, and dangerously flammable shrub that offers ridiculous shade to the great cedars. The bramble bush made them an offer that was actually a threat. If in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out from the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Under Gideon, Israel had enjoyed 40 years of peace. Abimelech's monarchical experiment collapsed in barely 3. In fact, the biblical text does not even say that he reigned, but that he dominated using a language of oppression and tyranny. And then the Bible narrates that God himself intervened. He sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem who had put him in power. The same men who financed the massacre of the 70 brothers now suffered the paranoia of their leader. Their former allies revolted, unleashing a bloody Israelite civil war against Israelite. In this story, there are no innocents, only criminals punishing each other. Abimelech crushed the rebellion with absolute cruelty. He destroyed the city of Shechem completely, and as an act of final malediction, sowed its ruins with salt so that nothing would ever grow there again. Nearly 1,000 Shechemites, men and women, took refuge in the tower of the temple, the same place from which the money had come to finance his ascent. Abimelech and his men cut branches, piled them against the walls, and set fire to the building. Everyone burned to death. Jotham's prophecy was literally fulfilled. Fire came out of the bramble and consumed the men of Shechem. The bramble did not give them shade. It was only fuel for their destruction. But the cycle of violence had not ended. Abimelech continued his campaign against another rebellious city, Thebez. While besieging a tower, an anonymous woman climbed onto the wall. She carried not a sword or a spear, but an object from her kitchen. A millstone, the upper will use to grind grain. This was an implement so essential to daily life that the very law of Moses prohibited taking it as collateral for a loan. No one shall take a hand mill or upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking someone's livelihood in pledge. This woman hurled the stone and struck Abimelech directly in the head, crushing his skull. The kitchen defeated the throne. The poetic justice was perfect. The man who began his reign by massacring his brothers upon a stone now died crushed by a stone thrown by a dying woman. His last act was a desperate attempt to control his own legacy. He called his armor-bearer and ordered him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, 'A woman killed him.'" The armor-bearer obeyed. His shameful death became a story so well known in Israel that generations later General Joab would use it as the example of the most infamous death a warrior could suffer. He wanted to be an eternal king and became a proverb of shame. The author of Judges closes the chapter with this sentence. Thus God repaid Abimelech for the evil he did to his father by killing his 70 brothers, and all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads. It is the longest chapter in the entire book, and it is not dedicated to a hero, but to an anti-judge precisely to discredit completely that model of leadership. Long before Israel formally asked for a king like Saul or David, it had this first and disastrous experience with Abimelech. The first king of Israel is not remembered as a hero, but as a macabre joke who ends up crushed by a millstone. Next is the judge Jephthah. Before Jephthah, the pattern was clear. Deborah received a prophecy and conquered. Gideon asked for signs and conquered. God guided, the judge obeyed, and Israel was free. But with Jephthah, the pattern breaks. The Spirit of God comes upon him, but Jephthah acts as if he had not received it. Jephthah was the son of Gilead and a prostitute. His origin was not a shameful secret but a public stigma. His own half-brothers expelled him from his home to seize his inheritance. Humiliated, Jephthah fled to the land of Tob, a border area east of the Jordan, a no-man's land. The outcast found refuge in a den of outlaws. There, idle men joined him, forming a band of mercenaries and looters. Rejection forged him into a ruthless survivor. When the Ammonites oppressed Israel, the very elders of Gilead who had expelled him sought him out, desperate. The humiliation for them was total. They offered him to be their leader. Jephthah's response is laden with bitterness. "Did you not hate me," he asks, "and drive me out of my father's house? Why then do you come to me now when you are in distress?" Before the battle, Jephthah did something unexpected. He attempted diplomacy. He sent messengers to the king of Ammon and deployed an impressive knowledge of the history of Israel, recounting the exodus and the conquest of those lands. It was the most elaborate legal defense of all the judges. However, his argument revealed a flawed theology. He told the Ammonite king, "Whatever Chemosh your God gives you to possess, that you possess, and whatever the Lord our God gives us to possess, that we will possess." Unwittingly, he treated the pagan god Chemosh as equal to Yahweh, revealing that he did not understand the power and exclusivity of the one true God. The king of Ammon ignored his messages. War was inevitable. Then the Spirit of Yahweh came upon Jephthah. With the presence of God, victory was already guaranteed. He needed nothing more. But Jephthah did not trust. Insecure and with a pagan mentality of buying favors, he resorted to what he knew, tribal negotiation. Immediately after receiving the Spirit, he made a reckless vow. "If you give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering." A burnt offering was a sacrifice that was completely consumed by fire. It was a decision of seconds with eternal consequences, born of deep spiritual insecurity. He acted from ignorance, demonstrating that it is a snare for a man to hastily dedicate something as holy, and after vows to consider. Imagine the scene. Jephthah returns victorious. He hears singing, tambourines, and dances. It is the moment of greatest glory of his life. Then the door of his house opens, and the first thing he sees is not an animal or a servant. It is his daughter, his only daughter. She comes out celebrating her father's victory, but that celebration becomes her death sentence. Jephthah had sworn to offer as a burnt offering whatever came out to meet him, and when he saw her, he tore his clothes, saying, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you are among those who trouble me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. This story is the antithesis of the sacrifice of Isaac. When Abraham raised the knife, a voice from heaven stopped him. A ram appeared as a substitute. The test was about faith, not about blood. Jephthah had 60 days, 60 dawns, while his only daughter wept in the mountains. But there was no voice, no angel, no ram, only silence. After the 2 months, his daughter returned, and he did with her according to the vow he had made. The silence of God is perhaps the most deafening judgment of the entire book. Israel had strayed so far from its covenant that God allowed the consequences of their ignorance to be executed to the end. Jephthah won a battle but lost his future. She was his only daughter, the only possibility of continuing his lineage. One would think that such a tragedy would change a man, but pain without wisdom only begets more pain. Shortly thereafter, the tribe of Ephraim reproached him. Why did you go to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? Gideon, in a similar situation, calmed them with diplomacy. Jephthah responded with fury. The dispute escalated into a bloody civil war. His men took the fords of the Jordan River, the only escape route. To identify the enemy, they used a linguistic test. They asked them to say the word shibboleth, which means ear of grain. The Ephraimites, because of their dialect, could not pronounce the sh sound and said, Sibboleth. Now then, say shibboleth. And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. A phoneme. That was the difference between life and death. 42,000 Israelites died at the hands of their brothers. The man who lost his only daughter massacred the children of thousands of families. The outcast who was expelled by his brothers now killed his brothers of nation. The violence he suffered he reproduced amplified. Jephthah killed more Israelites in peace than Ammonites in war. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years and died. His story is an enigma. The book of Hebrews names him in the gallery of the heroes of faith. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. How is it possible? Because God uses broken instruments. Jephthah had faith that God could give him military victory, but his faith was not based on the knowledge of who God was. Jephthah had faith, yes, but it was faith in a God molded in his own image, a God who could be bought with vows and appeased with sacrifices. Finally comes the judge Samson. In the Bible, very few births are announced by an angel. Isaac, Samuel, John the Baptist, Jesus. The list is short and Samson is on it. From his mother's womb, he is imposed the Nazirite vow, a special covenant of consecration. His mother receives specific dietary instructions, and an angel appears, not once, but twice to confirm the mission. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Everything seemed prepared for the arrival of a spiritual champion, but the most careful preparation in the history of the judges did not produce a good judge. The hero is born with a marked destiny, but destiny does not guarantee character. The archetype of the hero breaks with the first words that come out of his mouth. They are those of a capricious child. Upon seeing a Philistine woman in Timnah, he demands of his parents, I have seen a woman. Get her for me as my wife. He uses the language of one who points out an object he desires. The strongest man in the world sounds like a spoiled child. His first impulse is not to liberate his people but to satisfy his own eyes. In fact, a Hebrew verb marks the tragic rhythm of his life. Yered, which means to go down or to descend. He goes down to Timnah for a wife. He goes down to Ashkelon to kill Philistines. He goes down to Gaza to lie with a prostitute. And finally, he goes down to the valley of Sorek to find Delilah. He is always descending toward enemy territory, toward forbidden women, toward his own destruction. To understand Samson, one must first understand the silence of Israel. The pattern of the book of Judges was clear. The people sinned, suffered the oppression of an enemy nation, cried out to God for help, and he sent a deliverer. But in the days of Samson, after 40 years of Philistine domination, the key link has broken. Israel no longer cries out to God. The people have become accustomed to their chains. Oppression has become comfortable. The Philistines, known as the Sea Peoples, not only dominated militarily with their monopoly on iron and their network of cities, but had culturally seduced Israel. The pillar of Samson's consecration was the Nazirite vow, a covenant with 3 prohibitions that he demolishes one by one. First, not to consume any product of the vine, such as wine. Samson not only celebrates his wedding with a banquet where there was surely wine, but his first great act of strength occurs ironically in the vineyards of Timnah. Second, not to touch any corpse so as not to be ritually contaminated. Samson kills a lion with his hands and later extracts honey from its decomposing carcass. Then he gives it to his parents, contaminating them too, without revealing where it came from. Later, he uses the jawbone of a dead donkey to kill 1,000 Philistines, celebrating the victory obtained with an impure weapon. Samson plays with the limits, confident that his supernatural strength makes him an exception to the rules. The hair is the last thing he has left. It was the external symbol of a covenant that was already rotten inside, but the hair was never the source of his power. The most tragic verse of his story makes it clear. When Delilah betrays him and the hair is cut, the text says, "And she said, The Philistines are upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. And therein lies his great tragedy. Samson is an army of one man. He never leads others, never summons an army, never inspires his nation. His battles are not for the freedom of Israel but for personal revenge. They take his wife and he burns the Philistine fields. They hurt him and he returns the blow with more force. The text never calls him a judge while he lives, only in the final summaries of his story. He is the anti-judge, gifted with a divine strength but with an absolute spiritual weakness. Perhaps the most revealing episode of all is when 3,000 men of his own tribe, Judah, come not to join his cause, but to arrest him and hand him over to the Philistines. Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? They ask. What is this that you have done to us? His own people see him as a problem, not as a solution. They tie him up and hand him over. Samson breaks the ropes and kills 1,000 men with the jawbone, but it is an empty victory. He kills Philistines, but the political occupation of Israel continues intact. When 3,000 Israelites bind their own judge to hand him over to the oppressor, the diagnosis is clear. Samson is not the disease. He is the symptom of a nation that has forgotten how to be free. His final descent has a name, Delilah. She is the third Philistine woman in his life after his wife and a prostitute, but she is the only one the text names and the only one who dominates him completely. The dynamic is pathetic. The invincible man yields to insistence and emotional manipulation. For times she pressures him until he finally reveals the secret of his consecration. The Philistines capture him, gouge out his eyes, bind him with bronze chains, and put him to grinding grain in prison, a job reserved for animals or slaves. It is the perfect image of talent without character that finally collapses, of the addict who has hit rock bottom. But in that darkness, something begins to change, a small detail that shines in the midst of the darkness. The hair of his head began to grow. The Philistines organize a great festival in the temple of their god Dagon to celebrate the capture of their enemy. They bring Samson out to serve as entertainment and to mock him. Drunk with victory, 3,000 of their enemies watch him from the stands. Blind, humiliated, supported between the 2 central columns of the temple, Samson utters his first and only truly genuine prayer. O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. His motivation is still personal, but for the first time, he addresses God with humility, recognizing his total dependence. And God, in his mysterious sovereignty, listens to the cry. Let me die with the Philistines. He pushes the columns, bringing down the temple upon himself and upon all who were there. The text tells us that he killed more enemies in his death than in all his life. His greatest victory comes in his moment of greatest weakness, when he can no longer see, when he can no longer desire women, when the only thing left for him is to die. Samson returns home, but as a corpse. His brothers collect his remains. They collect the body to bury it in his father's tomb. Samson is the judge to whom the Bible dedicates the most chapters, but perhaps the one who had the least lasting impact, a descent into hell. The most disturbing part of the book begins in the house of a man named Micah, who steals a fortune, 11 pieces of silver, from his own mother. Unaware of the thief's identity, the mother curses him. But when a frightened Micah returns the money, she doesn't reprimand him. Instead, she blesses him and consecrates the stolen silver to Yahweh to fashion an idol. This is syncretism in its purest form, a toxic blend of faith in the true God with pagan practices that he himself had forbidden. Then a wandering traveler arrives. He's a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, seeking employment. Now, remember that the Levites were the tribe set apart by God to teach his law and to be the guardians of proper worship. But this Levite offers himself as a private idol priest. Micah offers him a contract, 10 pieces of silver a year, new clothes and food. Micah's faith has become a mere investment. His theology is purely materialistic. Now I know that the Lord will prosper me, because I have a Levite as my priest. He proclaims, utterly missing the point. Meanwhile, the tribe of Dan seeks a new home. They have failed to conquer the land God assigned them, defeated by their own lack of faith. So they send spies to find a place easier to take. The spies locate the city of Laish, a peaceful and trusting town, isolated from its allies and without military defenses. They posed no threat, making them the perfect victims. On their way, the 600 warriors of Dan pass by Micah's house and, without hesitation, steal his idols. Then they make the mercenary Levite an offer. Why be priest to just one man when you can be priest to an entire tribe? They ask, dripping with false promises. The biblical text is incredibly revealing about his character. When the Levite saw the opportunity for advancement, his heart rejoiced. His loyalty wasn't to God but to the best offer. The Danites massacre the defenseless people of Laish, burn their city to the ground, and rebuild it, renaming it Dan. It's there that they establish their stolen sanctuary. And here, the text reveals a devastating secret. Finally, we are told the identity of the mercenary Levite. His name was Jonathan, son of Gershom, grandson of Moses. The very grandson of Israel's great liberator is the one who establishes official idolatry in the nation. The conquest of the Promised Land has been utterly corrupted. Instead of being an act of faith, it has become a campaign of violence, theft, and opportunism. The story now focuses on another Levite. His concubine, a wife of secondary rank, leaves him and returns to her father's house in Bethlehem. He goes to win her back, to speak to her heart and reconcile. After several days of hospitality, they depart late, making a decision that will seal their fate. They avoid spending the night in Jebus because it is a foreign city. They prefer the supposed safety of the Israelite city of Gibeah in the territory of Benjamin. The irony is devastating. No one in Gibeah offers them refuge, breaking the sacred code of hospitality. Only an old man, who is also a foreigner, takes them in. That night, the men of the city surround the house, pound on the door, and demand to meet the Levite, using the same word used to refer to an act of gang rape. The scene is a chilling echo of Sodom and Gomorrah, but with a blood-curdling difference. These aren't pagans. They're the people of God. The reader expects fire to fall from the sky, but it doesn't come. God's silence is absolute. The elderly host, in his desperation, offers his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine to appease the mob. Then the Levite, the man who should have protected her, takes her and pushes her outside, handing her over to the mob. The text is brutally clear. He himself takes her out and closes the door behind her. All night long, the woman is abused by the mob. At dawn, she crawls to the door and collapses on the threshold, her hands stretched toward the inside. The next morning, he opens the door, ready to continue his journey, and finds her collapsed. His words are chillingly cold. "Get up, let's go." But she doesn't answer. The text doesn't even clarify if she died right there or on the way home. He puts her on his donkey, takes her home, cuts her into 12 pieces, and sends a piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. In ancient times, covenants were sealed by cutting an animal in two. Here, the shattered body of an anonymous woman, we are never told her name, becomes the symbol of a completely broken national covenant. Israel has been spiritually dismembered. The entire nation shudders. Such a thing has never been done or seen from the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt to this day. Israel's response is a surge of righteous fury, a fury that, ironically, they never showed against their Canaanite enemies. 400,000 warriors gather as one and demand that the tribe of Benjamin hand over the culprits from Gibeah. But Benjamin, in an act of tribal solidarity, misunderstood and placed above justice, refuses. They protect the rapists and murderers and prepare for war with an elite army that includes 700 left-handed slingers. Thus, civil war erupts. Israel consults God, but the first two battles are catastrophic defeats with 40,000 Israelites killed. In the third battle, the tide turns, and the tribe of Benjamin is virtually exterminated. 25,000 of their best warriors die. Their cities are burned, and their women and children killed. Only 600 Benjamite men manage to survive, hiding in the cave of Rimmon. But the victory tastes like ashes. It's then that the rest of Israel realizes their own excess. Why, Lord, God of Israel, has this happened in Israel, that one tribe is missing from us today? In their fury, they had made an impulsive oath not to give their daughters in marriage to any Benjamite. Now, one of the 12 tribes faced extinction. Their solution is as monstrous as the original crime. First, they discover that the city of Jabesh-Gilead didn't join the war. They send an army. They massacre all its inhabitants, men, women, and children, except for 400 virgins, who are given as plunder to the Benjamite survivors. As this is not enough, they devise a second plan. During an annual religious festival in Shiloh, where the tabernacle of God was located, they advised the remaining Benjamite men to hide in the vineyards and kidnap the young women who come out to dance. Kidnapping and abuse become official policy for national reconciliation. Israel is trying to solve a heinous crime by committing other crimes. And so the book ends, abruptly, without celebration, without peace, without a glimmer of redemption or hope. The reader is left stunned, contemplating a landscape of smoldering ruins and shattered morality. Justice has cost the lives of tens of thousands, the annihilation of a neutral city, and the kidnapping of hundreds of women. Israel wanted to be like the other nations. By abandoning their God, they became something worse than the Canaanites they should have driven out. Sodom was reborn in Gibeah. Idolatry took root in Dan. Justice was transformed into revenge. The descent has been complete. Israel has hit rock bottom. The stage is set, dark and desperate, crying out for the arrival of a true king. The message of the book is unsettling. If you've followed this journey, you likely feel a deep exhaustion, and that feeling is intentional. The book of Judges is an anomaly in the Bible. It's the only narrative book of the Old Testament that ends in utter chaos, without resolution or a happy ending. The author doesn't want to comfort you. He wants to make you uncomfortable, because the unease you feel is an echo of Israel's reality and the true starting point of this whole story. At first glance, the book's conclusion seems simple. The final phrase, repeated like an echo, gives us the apparent answer. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. A superficial reading would suggest that the problem was a lack of government, that anarchy was the enemy, and a monarchy the solution. But that interpretation is a trap, because the truth is that the throne of Israel was never empty. Since Sinai, their king was God himself, and they had his law, the Torah, as their constitution. That is why the book does not document the absence of a king. It documents something much more terrifying, the multiplication of millions of little kings, each ruling a kingdom of one person, himself. Herein lies the great paradox of the book. The people yearned for unlimited freedom, without the restrictions of God. They sought autonomy, But the freedom of one tribe almost led to the extermination of another. The freedom of their leaders resulted in the kidnapping of the maidens of Shiloh. The lesson is brutal. Without a moral standard that is above us, the freedom of the strong always becomes the enslavement of the weak. This unbearable chaos sets the stage for the next chapter in the story, the Book of Samuel. The people, desperate for some order, will cry out for a human king. But the irony is tragic. They will ask Samuel for a king like all the other nations, forgetting that their desire to be like the other nations was precisely the original cause of their decline. The message of Judges is, therefore, radical. The text not only criticizes the anarchy of no king, but also anticipates the failure of the human monarchy. Saul will fail, David will sin, Solomon will fall into idolatry, and the kingdom will be divided. The conclusion is inevitable. Neither self-government nor the government of an imperfect man is the final solution. No political system can save humankind if its fundamental loyalty, its relationship with God, is broken. The problem is much deeper, and that's why the Book of Judges functions as a universal mirror. When a society or a person declares that they have no king, it doesn't mean that they don't worship anything. It means that the throne of their heart has been usurped. The self becomes the only moral standard. As the thinker G.K. Chesterton said, "When people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything." But where did all this disaster begin? The book's answer is as simple as it is devastating: in forgetting. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. You may have noticed that in this video, many verses refer to the book of Proverbs. That's because Israel, during its decline, constantly fails to uphold the wisdom that Proverbs teaches us. The book of Proverbs might have saved Israel in its time, and it certainly can help you too. In the video, we concentrate all the knowledge of the Old Testament, and I assure you that it is really interesting. Click on the screen. You can't miss it.